For coping with the coronavirus pandemic, there's at least 9 different strategies that you can use to try and deal with the stress and promote your wellness during this challenging time. Any one of those can help, and as you combine them together, you can build what's been called, Barbara Fredrickson, a researcher, talks about upward spirals. So just as there are downward spirals from the stresses, we can also build kind of ladders of feeling better and doing better. The first one of those is around being aware, which sounds simple enough, but it's that matter of awareness, of being aware of what's happening, and certainly that includes issues about the pandemic that are happening in our community, things that are external to ourselves, but also being aware of what's our own experience. In particular, what are our feelings and emotions and thoughts that are going on inside. And if we're aware of that, many people at some point or another may be able to identify there's anxiety or worry or feelings of stress, concerned about what's happening, or maybe a sense of loss that's going on the inside. A second coping strategy after awareness is practicing acceptance. A phrase that's helpful is, "It is what it is." None of us likes the situation with the pandemic and how that's affecting our lives. But to accept for the moment, it is what it is, and to also accept whatever feelings we're having. Those uncomfortable feelings of maybe feeling stressed or worried or anxious or down, those are all normal reactions. And as we accept those and are aware and accept those, that's one way that we can practice what's also called mindfulness. And that's kind of a foundation to be able to make other positive changes. A third strategy is to, while there's many things that we cannot control, to practice and to take control of the things that we can. There's both kind of a physical part of that in terms of doing things like washing our hands or wearing masks or staying at home if, to the extent we're able to do that, is one way that we can take control and limit our exposure or vulnerability to the illness. But there's also things that we can do in terms of taking control of our emotional and our mental life. In particular, we can be proactive about that. One thing we can do is limit how much exposure we're experiencing from the media about the pandemic. And certainly to stay informed and knowledgeable is very important. But sometimes people can get kind of stuck in a zone of watching too much media coverage in a way that can be emotionally overwhelming or even traumatizing. So to be able to limit that exposure, and then also to practice a number of positive coping skills when it comes to stress. Some of that is very simple, like getting proper rest and nutrition, but also to be able to do things like to redirect our attention and our thinking patterns if we get into worrying too much or too negative or too down about things, to be able to redirect to some of the positive things that are happening. And we'll talk about ways to do that in a little bit, as well as to practice other positive coping strategies for stress, so things like deep breathing and meditation, and we'll also be covering those as well. A fourth strategy is that we can create connection. There's obviously a lot of talk from the government and from public health officials about the importance of social distancing, but I think we need to rethink that. As others have said, it's not so much social distancing as it is physical distancing. And more than ever, that we need to be able to maintain and even build our social support, because social support is so important for our mental health and even for our physical health and immunity. We can do that by certainly of the family or the people we live with in our household, to be able to make sure that we're having time to truly connect in meaningful ways with them, and for people outside of our households. Fortunately, we live in an area where there's so many technological tools, and a number of people are doing creative and fun things like Zoom happy hours or Zoom dinners or get together with friends or family, as well as using the telephone. All those are ways that we can build that connection during a time when we can feel our normal social connections fray because of physical or social distancing. A fifth strategy is to really kindle our sense of compassion and kindness. If anything, we've discovered that during this time that the world may be 25,000 miles wide at the equator, but it's a very small place. We're really like one global village as this pandemic has spread across the world and affected everyone in a short period of time. And with that, we can know that everyone is experiencing things that are similar to what we're experiencing, and to be able to have compassion for their suffering and for their difficulties and for their stress. And in addition to feeling that compassion, we can also practice kindness. And there's a number of different ways we can do that. Some examples would be for a neighbor who may be elderly or may have a health condition who is at risk for going outside. Perhaps we can check in with that person and see if we can pick up something for them when we're making a trip to the grocery store or to the pharmacy. Or sometimes just to build that social connection again in a positive way, to be able to call and check on that person and ask how they're doing and provide them with some emotional support during this difficult time. And part of compassion is not only being compassionate toward other people, but also being compassionate for ourselves. I think we need to be patient and gentle with ourselves. As we said earlier, we may be aware that we're experiencing things like stress or anxiety or worry or a down mood, and to again be compassionate of knowing that that's something that's part of being human and going through this really historic, in a negative sense of the phrase, time in human life, and to be compassionate for ourselves. You know, one of the things about the pandemic is it can create so much negativity, and understandably so, given the difficulty of the situation and of the illness. But it shouldn't rob us of the things that are still positive. One thing we can do in that way is to really take time to try and remember, what is it that we appreciate? Who and what do we appreciate, are we grateful for in our lives? One neuroscience researcher used the phrase that the mind tends to be like Velcro for the negative and like Teflon for the good. Our mind tends to go to the negative, but we can redirect it by practicing gratitude and gratefulness. Often it's helpful to use a conscious process to do that. There's one called 3 Blessings, where each day, if you take just a few moments to be able to think about, or even better yet, to write down in a simple log or journey, what are 3 things that you feel grateful for? So even in the middle of this difficult time, it can put us in touch with the things that add richness and meaning and appreciation in our life. Similarly, a 7th strategy is that it's important, by again being proactive, that we can seek to cultivate fun, and not only fun, but joy and happiness in our life. And how do you do that? Some of the things we've talked about before, like dealing with stress or being grateful, research shows that's helpful for building happiness, but even other things of consciously smiling is something that adds happiness to people's lives, as well as being able to use humor, and to maybe sometimes rediscover really the things that are most important that bring us happiness. One researcher, Richard Layard, said the most common strand in everything that brings happiness is love, and to be able to focus on our love for other people, which in turn brings us greater happiness. A 8th strategy is perspective taking. One simple way of summing that up is the statement that this too shall pass. As difficult this is, and as slow as this situation seems to be unfolding, it will pass, and we know in the future that things will be much better. Not only do we know that, but we can also remember the trials and the resilience of our ancestors. If we stop and think about it, we come from a long line of descendants who struggled with things like war and famine and other disease plagues and oppression, and they survived that. And that's in our DNA. There's a certain resilience that we have that's built into the very fabric of our life and our genes. And even closer to home than our ancestors, we can think about It's useful to remember what are some struggles that you've gone through in your life previously, and how did you overcome that? What strengths did you use? And just the fact that you've been through difficult situations and you are where you are in your life today probably says a great deal about your resilience and your difficulty to overcome stress and hardship. Finally, a ninth strategy is to really discover or reaffirm the things that are meaningful and your own purpose in life. So I would ask you the question, what can you take out of this really difficult situation? What is it that's most important to you? For some of us, that may be we can be more aware of the preciousness of life, of the people and the activities that are most important to us. And it gives us the opportunity to kind of refocus on how do we want to be even in the face of this crisis. We do have some choice. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration death camps in World War II, said that every freedom can be taken from a person but one, the freedom to choose your attitude. And so too, we can choose our attitude, especially as we look at the things that are important to us and our values like compassion and caring and love. And we can use that to guide our actions through this really difficult time in human history.